I have some questions. I have 5 of them, so when I'm done with 5, you'll know I'm done. Question number 1 is this: who is influencing your children and grandchildren? If you take the average kid going, or the average adult going to a church, and assume that they go 2 hours a week for every week of the year, for the entire time for a child that they would be in kindergarten through 12th grade, it comes out to about 1,500 hours that they're in church. If you take the amount of time that kids spend with their families between kindergarten and 12th grade, and for those of you who have raised older kids, you know that the older they get, the less and less time they're with you. And once they start driving, they rarely are home. But that amounts to about 10 or 12,000 hours that kids spend with their families between kindergarten and 12th grade. Kaiser Family Foundation did a study in 2009, and based on their study, they said that a child will spend between the years of kindergarten and 12th grade 15 to 20,000 hours being influenced by media, television, music, computers, cell phones. And if you take the average kid going to school between kindergarten and 12th grade, that's about 15,000 hours. So if you think that your church and your family has the most influence on your kids, you're probably wrong. Because your church is spending 1,500 hours trying to offset 30,000 hours between education and media. So as Christian parents, we're trying to overcome the combined effect of culture and school of 30,000 hours of influence. And the truth of it is, whoever controls the media and controls education will eventually control our nation. So question number 1 is, who is influencing our kids and grandkids? Number 2 is this: what is the worldview of the people who are influencing your children? You know, depending on who you ask, there are 4 or 5 different major worldviews, and your worldview determines things like, what is truth? What is reality? What's knowledge? Who are we as humans? Everyone has a worldview and makes their decisions based on it. And the 2 most important worldviews in our nation, the 2 that seem to be at odds most of the time and involve the most people, are Christianity and what most people would call secular humanism, or postmodernism, or whatever you want to call it. And basically, the differences are these: Christians believe that God exists and He's the center of the universe. And a secular humanist would believe that man is the center of everything and that God does not exist. Christians would believe that God created everything. Humanists would believe that everything is the result of chance. Christians would believe that man is created in God's image and has a purpose. Humanists would believe that there's really no purpose for anything. Morality comes from God is what we would say, and the humanists would say morality is relative. There's really no right or wrong. It kind of depends on your situation. And if you want to see an example of that in the Bible, just read the book of Judges. It says what? Everyone did right in their own eyes. Christians believe that every person matters to God. Humanists would believe that some people have more value than others. If you have been listening to the debates about Obamacare and things like that, there were people who would believe that as you get older, you have less value, right? Because you start to cost more money. They would believe that unborn children have different value than the rest of us as human beings. Christians believe that man is responsible for our actions and that we will be held accountable for those actions. Humanists would believe that humans are on their own and there is no accountability for what we do. And finally, we believe that death ushers us into eternal life, and the humanists would say death is the end of our existence. Now, the thing to remember as we talk about this is that the people who are secular humanists believe what they believe every bit as strongly as what you and I believe about being Christians. And so when things happen in politics or in other things in life, and we say, I don't even understand how they can come to that conclusion, we have to understand that they think the same thing about us. And so remembering that our worldview shapes us, we believe certain things about truth. And what we believe about truth shapes our values. And our values shape what we believe, and our beliefs shape our actions. And so think about it this way. If you're a naturalist and you believe that a rock and a tree are the same as a cow and a person and that we're all the same, it's going to shape your actions, and so you wind up with a radical environmentalist who chain themselves to a tree because that tree is every bit as important as a person. And on the other end of the spectrum, you have doctors who are in Africa as missionaries trading Ebola patients because of what they believe to be true and what their values are. And they believe that every person matters, and so they're there risking their life. And the thing about worldviews is they don't just apply to some esoteric philosophers that are sitting out there, in their tweed coats, smoking their pipes. Everybody has a worldview. Your neighbors do. And the athletes do. And the movie stars do, and the politicians do. The people who write TV shows have a worldview. And so I've never seen this show, I've seen ads for it. The people who write Modern Family have a worldview. The people who wrote Seinfeld had a worldview. Not only that, I remember, some of you may have read Lonesome Dove. It's great. The writing is phenomenal. And it's an incredibly depressing book because nothing good happens to anyone. They all wind up dying. And when I got to the end of the book, I said, I understand what Larry McMurtry's worldview is. And so, if our kids' lives are dominated by culture and education systems that are founded on secular humanism, what are they learning? And remember, as I'm talking about this, I'm talking about the system. So when I talk about the education system, I understand that there are Christians in public education. I was one for 20-some years. Gordy was one for 20-some years. 30-some years? I won't say. Maybe more, I don't know. But when I was a Christian in the public education system, I considered myself a missionary, similar to someone who was a missionary and maybe when the Iron Curtain was still there. Because I knew that even though my kids in my classes knew I was a Christian and I went to church with some of them, I knew that if I stood up and shared what I actually believed about things, I would get fired. And if you don't believe that, think about this. I would challenge you to go down to a meeting of the Corvallis School Board and say, glad that you're doing a character education program in Corvallis, and what I think you should do is I would love to see you base that character education on biblical concepts of right and wrong. The system, even if there are Christians on the school board, the system doesn't allow that. So question number 2 is, what is the worldview of the people who are influencing your kids? And question number 3 is this: why does it matter what their worldview is? So let me ask you a question. You have a friend. This isn't one of my 5, by the way. This is an extra question. You have a friend who comes up to you and says, you know what? There's this school right down the road, and it is a phenomenal school academically. Their programs are amazing. They have great athletic teams. And the only issue is that they're run by Buddhists. And just so you know, if your kid goes to school there, they're going to be taught Buddhist philosophy. And my question is, would you allow your child or grandchild to attend that school? What if there was a school right down the road that was Islamic? It was a great school. Would you allow your kids to attend a school that you knew they were going to be taught the concepts of Islam? And why not? Because you know the worldview being taught there is significantly different from yours. So let me ask you a question. Would you allow your child or grandchild to attend a secular humanist school? In this book, The End of Education, Neil Postman says this: public education does not serve a public, it creates a public. So let me read you some quotes. The battle for humankind's future must be waged and won in the public school classroom by teachers who correctly perceive their role as the proselytizers of a new faith, a religion of humanity, utilizing a classroom instead of a pulpit to carry humanist values into wherever they teach. The classroom must and will become an arena of conflict between the old and the new, the rotting corpse of Christianity, together with its adjacent evils and misery, and the new faith of humanism. That's John Dunphy in The Humanist. He wrote that in 1983. Here's another one. If we do our jobs correctly, we are going to raise a generation of kids who don't believe the claims of the religious right. When we capture the kids, we will own the world in the future. That is from the education goals of the Gay and Lesbian Education Network. Next, how much do we regard children as being the property of their parents? It's one thing to say people should be free to believe whatever they like, but should they be free to impose their beliefs on their children? Is there something to be said for society stepping in? What about bringing up children to believe manifest falsehoods? Isn't it always a form of child abuse to label children as possessors of beliefs that they are too young to have thought out? Richard Dawkins, famous scientist, writes a lot about evolution in his book, What's So Great About Christianity? Here's another one. Secular professors in the universities ought to arrange things so that students who enter as bigoted, homophobic, religious fundamentalists will leave college with views more like our own. Students are fortunate to find themselves under the benevolent teaching of people like me and to have escaped the grip of their frightening, vicious, dangerous parents. We're going to go right on trying to discredit you parents in the eyes of your children, trying to strip your fundamental religious community of dignity, trying to make your views seem silly rather than discussable. Dr. Richard Rorty, University of Virginia. Here's a great one. The philosophy of the schoolroom in one generation will be the philosophy of government in the next. You know who said that? Abraham Lincoln. Do you see that one being played out in our society right now? Do you see the philosophy of our government and the things that are happening reflecting the fact that secular humanism has dominated our schoolrooms? We expect politicians to operate within our framework of right and wrong. We're surprised when they don't. Finally, a new civil war is raging in America, and this civil war is a war of values. Whoever wins this war will get our children. So let me ask again, does it matter what the people that are teaching your kids believe? You know, and from the very beginning, I believe Christian education was supposed to be Christian. Deuteronomy 6 and 7, and these words which I command you today will be in your heart. You shall teach them diligently to your children, and shall talk of them when you sit in your house, when you walk by, when you lie down, and when you rise up. All day, every day, we were supposed to be educating our kids and teaching them Christian stuff. So, next question. What does this have to do with Santiam Christian? Well, if we really believe that every person forms a worldview and a framework through which they interpret life, one of the interesting things is that every study you read will say that everyone has formed their framework or their worldview by the age of 13, which is basically 7th grade. Guess when we get a lot of transfers into Santiam Christian? 7th grade and 9th grade. Our high school classes are almost twice as big as our elementary classes. And so if we get a kid who transfers into Santiam Christian as a junior in high school, the odds of us being able to do anything about their worldview are pretty slim. Now, some of them obviously come to us with a pretty well-developed Christian worldview. But if kids are developing this framework by the age of 13, we need them before that. And you know what? School can't just be about great academics, athletics, facilities, or programs, because the secular schools right down the road have those. But Santiam Christian and other Christian schools around here, such as Albany Christian or Zion Lutheran or Cross Hill or Salem Academy or East Lynn, have the unique ability to present an education that works in concert with your worldviews. And I remember I didn't even really get this until we came here, because my history is obviously in public education. And I can remember when I felt, or I first realized, that my kids were coming home at the end of the day and I wasn't trying to undo the stuff that they had learned. And it wasn't always everything that they learned. But I remember the conversations around our dinner table when my kids were in public school, a lot of them were about how what they had learned today, mom and dad didn't agree with that. And I remember just sort of that weight being lifted off my shoulders that I didn't even really know was there. And so the mission of Santiam Christian is this. Our mission is to assist parents in the Christian training of their children by providing a Christ-centered academic environment. We do not provide a man-centered academic environment. And in addition to that, our vision is this. Our vision is that while we are assisting you as parents and grandparents, our vision is that we want to help develop men and women of godly character who demonstrate Christ-like leadership in their lives and who know how to live in community. What we mean by that is this: we want to be able to teach kids how to communicate. And that's really based on the fact that if you ask a lot of people what the world needs is men and women like that. This year we started offering a character education program where every month we're focusing on a different trait. This month it is forgiveness. And from preschool through 12th grade, we have conversations about forgiveness. Next month it'll be gratefulness. But the difference between us and other schools is that our character education program is based on the Bible and what God says about it. It seems pointless to me to teach character education if you really don't believe that there is a right and wrong. Because how can you tell kids you need to forgive each other? Based on what? As a Christian, you would say it's based on the fact that God in Christ forgave me, and because he forgave me, I ought to forgive others. I remember when I was teaching science, we used part of our year for the DARE program. And one of the things that struck me is that the DARE program, which is a drug and alcohol education program for junior high kids, the thing that struck me about it, and I finally asked the instructor this, I said, you're giving these kids this information, but you're never telling them that drug use is wrong. And he said, we don't tell kids it's right or wrong. We're not the ones who get to make that moral judgment. What we do is we present them with the facts and we try to help them make the correct decision. It doesn't make sense to have a character education program that's not based in the Bible. How do you teach children to be truthful if their concepts of right or wrong are different and can change? And so remember this, education and how children are educated matters. If the major emphasis of education is the communication of ideas, what are the ideas that are being communicated? And I would tell you this, whoever wants the next generation the most will get them. And as Christians, we're called to live lives of conspicuous influence. When you read Matthew 5:14 through 16, it says this, you're the light of the world. A city that is set on a hill cannot be hidden, nor do they light a lamp and put it under a basket, but on a lampstand, and it gives light to all who are in the house. Let your light so shine before men that they may see your good works and glorify your Father in heaven. And before we do all of that, we have to have the skills that are necessary to take up those positions of influence. And we need to be able to teach students so that they have the tools that give them the ability to have positions of conspicuous influence that will allow them to shine God's light all over the world. So we need you to partner with us as we partner with parents to develop a generation of young people who can demonstrate Christ-like leadership, godly character, and live in community with others, and teach them the skills necessary to shine God's light in positions of influence all over the world. Thank you.